So really, just to begin, I realised it's a very big topic, and I've only really got 20 minutes today to talk to everybody. So the main impact of today, and what I want to get across, is really the foundation information businesses need. The plan here is to increase this series of webinars to dive into more detail as we go on. But like I said, there's a chat session and a question and answer session. So if anybody does have any questions, please pop them in there and we'll get to them at the end. So look, I appreciate there's a lot of confusion and lots of people are confused about this topic and this subject. And my aim today really is to give you that idea about why we report carbon, where it all happened, how it came from. So I've set up a little agenda, and I suppose we'll start there. So the topic of today really is to talk around carbon history and how did we get here, who reports carbon and why, which types of customer potentially you fall into. We'll go on there to our approach to calculating your carbon. We'll talk a little bit about carbon reporting and bureau services. Like I said, I've only really got 20 minutes, so it's really trying to get the most out of this time. And then we'll talk really more about some real world examples and some practical advice. And the aim with all of this is for me to provide you with the benefits associated with doing all of this. I think a good place to really start to get everybody on a level playing field is to give you an idea as to carbon history and why people are reporting and how do we even get to this place in time. And I think once everybody's on that precipice, we can move forward from there. So just to give you the brief history. So what I'm showing you here is the carbon cycle. And this is the main problem that we have today. So as you can see from the diagram, the way carbon is created, and I'll talk a little bit about carbon and what carbon is. So carbon is created when we burn things, when we change things in our atmosphere, and they are what cause our emissions. Now, our planet already has a way to deal with these emissions, which are what we call our sinks. These are our land sinks that you can see here and our ocean sinks. And as you can see with the problem today, our total emissions that we're producing, and this is in billions of tons, is 38.8 billion tons. And our sinks at the moment today only have the ability to take 21.7 tons of that away, leaving this deficit of 18.7 tons. And this is where predominantly the issue comes from and what businesses are looking to do and what businesses are looking to change. To give you a bit of brief history around carbon itself, when we talk about carbon, we don't just talk about CO2. We talk about a number of different chemicals that are made up that we convert into CO2. So for a simple example, when you start your car, there's different toxins given off, and that's not just CO2. So we convert everything to what you may be familiar with as CO2e. Let's go on to the next slide. So this slide now is showing you really what carbon has been doing across the sort of last million years. This is a very famous graph called the hockey stick graph. It's been talked about for sort of 50, 60 years now. But as you can see, the planet has been sort of taking care of itself pretty well over time, all the way down from the Ice Age to the previous highest peak. And as you can see, what happened here around the start of the Industrial Revolution is where carbon really took off. And this is where the problem stems from. So about 20 years ago, the UN put together the IPCC at the UN, and this is the first time, it was a major breakthrough, and that's why I'm really talking about this. So it was the first time that 195 member states got together and agreed it was human activity doing it. Because it's human activity doing it, they decided, well, if it's us doing it, it should be us that should be able to fix this. And this is really where the IPCC came along and started creating what today are GHG protocols. So they created different sorts of documents that we now have as guidance documents that organisations like ourselves follow to help businesses account for their carbon. As the UN panel then increased, the WRI and the WBCSD, which is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, designed their protocol documents, which I will go on and show you about a little bit later. So we got to this point where we understand the problem of us creating too much, us burning too many fuels, and our land sinks not being able to deal with it. We finally came to that understanding that over time, it's us causing it, and that's really where the UN came along and started putting these plans into place. Like all things with the UN, once they put their plans into place, governments then adopted these plans. And we are where we are today, where we start getting compliance. So the UK government came along and started asking large companies to do this. So let's move on from there. Once they started this, the UN then decided they had 6 major areas that they can look at for all businesses to try and understand their carbon and reduce their carbon. I'll briefly talk about 2 of these. So you've got one is energy. So all businesses use energy in one form or the other. And really what the businesses should be looking to do is look at their energy, account for their energy, understand where and when they're using it and how they're procuring their energy. Again, most businesses have a function of transport, and there we're looking at how you transport your goods and vehicles and what you do with them. And the UN came together and said, well, these are the 6 areas all businesses need to look at. And once they've looked at these and understood their information, they can now then look to reduce these core major systems. As we got onto these core major systems, the whole ESG strategy came about. I want to talk to you about this because it's again, it's another buzzword: ESG, SBTI, carbon emissions, carbon footprints. What's it all about, and how do I understand this better? So when we talk about ESG and we talk about sustainability, what we're talking about is a blend of 3 things. We're talking about your environmental effectors, and that's what you do within your business. That's how your business operates. We look at the social values of your business and what your business does in relation to your staff, and also in relation to your supply chain. And then true sustainability is then looking at governance, and that's looking at your particular organization and how your board governs these 2 things. And when you put these 3 things in place, you get into what is called an ESG strategy. And this is a part of things that businesses now need to do, and businesses that have a good ESG rating then get better financial systems. Once another concept that we come into is net zero and carbon neutral. And I wanted to talk about this because once you understand those systems, people thought, oh, brilliant, I can count it, and then I can offset it. But there is a complete distinction between those 2 things. So the first thing I want to talk about is net zero. What is net zero? So net zero is actually counting your emissions, and then once you've counted those emissions, looking to ways to actually organically remove those from your business. What carbon neutrality forms of is doing the same accounting principle of GHG accounting, and then taking the carbon that you have and buying recognized offsets or carbon credits to offset that emission. Now, this is voluntary, but if you follow this approach, what we say is if you're just going to buy offsets, that's probably not the best way to go about following this path. But this is an important distinction to make because to get to true net zero, you have to account for it. So when we come to this part, we then move on to our next part. So what the WRI did and the WBSCD did is design what we call scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. And lots of you will be familiar with this picture. The chemicals at the top are what we actually count. So sulfur fluoroxide, we've got normal CO2, we've got nitrogen, and different chemicals that make up CO2. So the industry created the 3 scopes that we look at today. You're looking at scope 1, which are your company facilities, your company vehicles. We're looking at scope 2, and that's normally where we start. Scope 3 is looking at everything else your business does, and that's split into 15 areas. We call the first area the upstream, and we call the second area the downstream. The upstream we call cradle to gate, and you being the front gate, and then we've got gate to grave. So this is everything that happens before your organization, everything you buy, your employee commuting, your business travel, and then everything happens after. So really, within these first few minutes, where we've come to is understanding a little bit about carbon, where it comes from, who designed the corporate guidance, which is the UN. The UN then created that corporate guidance, and they developed this structure, and this is how all businesses, us included, have to account for their carbon. So once this came along and the UK came along and put this compliance in, what happened? So the first thing that happened, and this is our major customer type, is large companies have to report their emissions. So these companies are formed of, if you meet any of these criteria, you should be reporting your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And this is the first type of customer that sort of approached us. So when they started approaching us, we thought to ourselves, all right, well, how are we going to deal with this? So we formulated a plan, and we formulate this plan with all our organizations. So again, if you do meet this criteria and you're not currently doing this, please do get in touch, because there are fines for organizations that aren't doing this. It's very important that businesses that meet this criteria do actually do their scope 1, scope 2, do ESOS and do second reporting. And that's something that we can help businesses and organizations with. What did we do? We created what we call our carbon ethics cycle. So this is the cycle we run through all our businesses with. Our first starting point is to understand businesses. From understanding businesses, we then go on to measure their scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 emissions, depending on what they want to do. And that derives what we call their base or benchmark. So we understand for that calendar year or financial year, and we often advise you do it by your financial year. We will tell you how much carbon was associated with your business. And at that point, we derive that number, if you want to call it the number. Once we're at the number and we've fully understood how you as a business are conducting yourselves, we then have the ability, using different departments, and we have different departments within the organization, we will sit down and we'll consult with you as to how we can then help your organization to then reduce and mitigate those emissions. Our department is headed up by my colleague, Dr. James Crosby, and there we will work with you to talk about technology that's out there. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the technology that I'm referring to, from solar to heat pumps. But more importantly than that, we look at every facet of your business. And that's a really important thing to do, to look at every facet, to understand where your costs are being derived from and what savings you can make. Along with that, we don't only just look at how you use your energy, but we look at how you procure your energy, when and where you're using your energy. And that's a really important part. We have a mantra, as I'm sure most of you will understand, that without measuring, managing, without measuring, it's very difficult for businesses to have any true sort of real impact on what they can do. Once we've done that and we've put that technology into place, or we've talked to you about offsetting what you can't organically remove, we will then re-report and recertify. And this is like an ongoing annual circle of improvement. And this happens annually. We work with businesses each year. We often find it's too much for lots of businesses to do this all in one go. But very much this is the mantra we follow. So where are we right now? So we're up to that point where the big companies are having to report their carbon. And then we have everybody else. So let's talk about everybody else. And this is where most organizations and most businesses will fit into, and you'll fit into one of these categories. So who else comes to me? People that come to me is because you've been asked to. It's because you want to, or because you need to. And what we need to understand is, if you're one of those customers, how is this all going to benefit you as an organization? So the first thing we find is what I call the trickle-down effect. So you've got all these big organizations and they're forced or being asked to report their carbon. But as you know, large organizations don't actually do a lot of their own work, and they have lots of SMEs under them in their supply chain. At that point, when they realize that they have to report that data, the question comes down the chain onto you, and you get that trickle-down effect. So smaller organizations are now being asked to start to account for their carbon footprint, and that's where a lot of problem lies. There's a lot of small SMEs that don't have the resource, and they don't have the internal skills to start these plans. So that's the first type of business, and I'm seeing a lot of that right now. Number two, get businesses that call me to say, Paul, my competition are doing this. I'm looking at what they're advertising. They're saying their services are carbon neutral, and I'm missing out on this. And for that reason, I also need to take part in this journey. We're getting a lot of that. As you can imagine, you only have to turn on the TV to see what's going on, and the revolution, what I call the green revolution. So you get a lot of younger people, you've got a lot of information out there today, and people understand the importance of now looking at their climate. We go on from there, and all businesses want to do business. And part of that is procurement. Part of that is tendering for business. Public procurement guidelines now state that if you want to deal with a public house, a public body, a council, they are going to start asking you for your credentials. Something a lot of you might be familiar with is a PPN 0621 form that asks businesses to report their scope 1, scope 2, and 5 elements of their scope 3. And a lot of the times when they want to do that, they don't really know where to begin or where to start. And that's where organizations like ourselves have the ability to help people. We've got organisations coming to us who are trying to attract younger staff, and younger staff today are now looking at more environmentally conscious businesses, and that's really who they want to work for. Companies are having to do a lot of work to try and get their sustainability credentials up to encourage these types of staff to come and work for them. I think that then we fall into that last part of being market leaders, people that want to do it. I have businesses and business owners that have come to me, and one of the first questions we ask is, why is it you're doing this? What is the interest? And what we tend to find is that they want to do it because they want to be a market leader. They want to be at the top of their chain, and they understand the importance of driving down their carbon emissions to help them achieve that. It also obviously helps them differentiate themselves from their other co-competitors in the market. Lastly, but by no means leastly, and we'll go into some examples around this a little bit later, cost efficiency. Lots of businesses understand that understanding how they use what they use, where they use it, how they're using their energy, how they're doing their business travel. By understanding their usage, they have the ability to then make an impact, make a change. So these different types of organizations are all coming into me. They're all asking different questions, but they all have the same underlying problem, which is at the moment as an SME or even bigger businesses, they don't actually know how to begin this journey or how to start. And that's really where we take part. They all understand that either they have to do it or they want to do it. And they all understand that if lots of companies understand that if they don't do it, there's certain businesses they can't actually encounter for. So when we get here, these are all the types of different businesses, and there's a benefit derived from each of these, because without doing this journey, they will find they either get left behind or they find that they can't tender for business that they want to tender for. And we work with lots of organisations like this. I had one recently that wanted to works in the drugs arena, and AstraZeneca are now asking all their partners to report on their carbon, and if they don't report on their carbon, they cannot tender for future business and are not recognised as a partner, and that's a real concern for lots of businesses. We're now going to talk a little about structure. So businesses all start in the same thing, and businesses need to align themselves to enable themselves to achieve this in a certain manner. All businesses start with their processes and behaviour. What does your business do, and what are the behaviours of your business? And that's the normal foundation of all businesses that we come across. Once we're there, we then talk about our standard operating procedures. Now, standard operating procedures I call as compliance, things organisations need to do, and that could be SECA, that could be ESOS, that could be ISO accreditations. These are all the things that your standard operating procedure means that you as an organisation have to have. On top of that, we overlay policy. That's what businesses do. They overlay all their policies on top of those three things, and their policies are what runs their business and how they control their business. This is how the structure of most businesses are, but I think there's two flaws that are missing, and these are the two flaws that are really important that come into play at the next stage. So the next stage is then, once you've got all that, is accounting, reporting, and then marketing what you're doing, and that's the main benefit that you're going to derive from doing journeys such as this. Once you're there, without measuring and accounting what it is you're doing as a business, and then reporting that and having a way to tell the bigger, wider world what you're doing, there is no chance you can make an effect. Once you've done your accounting, once you understand everything about yourself, then comes the last part, which is planning and execution, actually putting those plans into place and executing them. And that's a really important part. Once you've done that, you've got your actual structure of your premise, your office, your business. And our solution from there at last is to start from the beginning. So you'll start then, once you've done that, looking at next year, re-evaluating your processes, re-evaluating your behavior, and then everything else gets built on top of that. And that's the way we look at normal structures for normal businesses. So it's understanding what you do, understanding the need as to why you're doing it, and then helping organizations build those plans, account for what they do, help them report for what they do, because businesses themselves at this stage do not particularly have the experience, the expertise, the knowledge, or the skills, the time, or the resource. How and what do we do when we get to that stage for businesses? So I'll let you read this in your own time. The slides will be available to everybody after this presentation. But we start with situational analysis. We look at businesses, we create a plan, we create a benchmark to give them a map and an understanding of where they are today. And then we sit down with them to encourage them to design a target and creation plan. Once we've built that plan, then we submit to the board of your business, and hopefully that plan gets approval, and then we go through that plan. Stage 2 and stage 3 of what we do with businesses is an ongoing assessment of improvement. It's a loop. It goes round and round year on year. We don't advise businesses take on all of scope 1, 2, and 3 in one go. We don't find it advantageous at all, and we don't see the benefit. It can take larger organizations anything up to a year, 2 years, just to really understand this type of data. So we get to this stage now where this is our process with the businesses that we take, because we understand the importance of businesses needing to report it, needing to understand what they do, creating these plans and targets to help them either market their solutions, either deal with the competition that they have to deal with, either to help them to win new business for councils, for public sector business, and then move their business forward in that fashion. And that's really where we find the key to what we do. Once we've got all this information, how do we help? So the first starting point of where we help is to provide online portals. So we provide online portals where we've got all your information and we can put all that information in for you. And that tallies into what we call our bureau service. So when we look at you as a business, we're not just looking at what you do and how you do it. We're also investigating your energy, and we're looking at your bills. I'll come on to some real world examples towards the end of this presentation so people get a true understanding. But once we've got your benchmark, once we've given you the ability to look at what you do and how you do it on an online portal, we then have the ability to certificate what you do, to certify it. And we'll start by giving you what you see in the bottom right-hand corner, which is our benchmark certificates. So we have the ability to give you a benchmark, and from there you understand exactly how you have to drill down in your time. Once we're also there, we have carbon neutrality certificates, and we document and report all of these for businesses as we go along. What we then do is give you that potential. We have a full marketing department that can help businesses and organizations put this on their websites, understand what they do, and really tell this to your businesses, to your customers, and promote this for yourselves. Let's quickly now go on to, because I appreciate that we're running short on time. A few examples. We started with Tom Kerridge. Now, Tom Kerridge is quite a famous brand, as you all know, and we've linked this to our website. So if people want more information, please do go and have a look at that. But really what we've done here is we've looked at Tom Kerridge and we've understood how Tom Kerridge work. And through a combination of looking at technical advances from solar, and there was a number of them, it wasn't just one, looking at voltage optimization, looking at LEDs, and more importantly, looking at the way they procured their energy, we enable them to make a £50,000 saving annually on their costs. Covent Garden Market Authority, again, one of the largest markets in London. And we help them look at their carbon, and now we're investigating technology that will give them a 30% reduction. When I come on to bureau services, understanding what you spend and how you spend is really important. Making sure you spend the right amount is key. To give you some ideas of what we've done in bureau, once we've got this information, we go directly to your suppliers. We get the information, we get your invoice. We can even get information directly from your meter. On average, over a 2-year period, the average saving we're looking at for a lot of businesses is around £700. But it's not just about the saving you make. A very important thing is that 60% of all bills in our system are actually estimated. And a true example of what happened here was that a business that normally spends £600, because their bills were estimated, were actually spending a lot less than they should have been, and their bill should have been nearly double that. The problem then became that towards the end of the year, they were landed with a bill when a reading did happen of £7,000, and businesses do not want that. So being in control of everything you do and understanding what you do is really important for businesses. Some tips, I suppose, are important. My first tip is seek professional advice first. This is not an easy journey, and it is a journey. And I think before people get into it, they should seek professional advice. It's often free, to give businesses an idea of what they need to be thinking about, what types of data they need to be doing, what type of benefits they can derive from doing journeys like this. Keep good records of purchases including your mileage. This will come in. Even if you're not doing your journey today, it's important that you start collecting this now, because if you're not one of those customers today, then over time you will become one of those customers through that trickle down effect. Always start on a simple structured approach. Scope 1, scope 2. Start there. Keep it simple. Understand, build your processes up. Understand your scope 1 and scope 2, because they're the minimum requirements for most UK compliance and regulation. And lastly, don't try and do this yourself within your business. Set up teams. Talk about it within yourself. Set up teams. There'll be different types of data within different realms.